can you get good pictures in the city? I'm professional wildlife photographer Paul Miguel, and I've set myself the challenge of photographing urban wildlife around the city of Leeds, but there's two rules I've got to stick to. The first one is I have to stay within a 5-mile radius of Leeds city centre, and I've only got 48 hours. I'm going to show you how I make the most of each location and why I think this environment can be so good for wildlife photography. It's first thing in the morning on day one, and I'm on a stretch of Leeds-Liverpool Canal, actually very close to Leeds city centre. I'm hoping to get some different ducks, probably grey heron, possibly cormorant, and I'm heading for the dock, which is a mixed development area very close to Royal Armouries Museum, and there's also a weir, and those are often really good places for birds. One of the benefits for us of shooting in towns and cities is that it's often just more accessible, and also the walking can be easier as well. And I think for most of us, we probably don't have to travel too far to get to this kind of environment. And in terms of the wildlife, what attracts the wildlife to the urban environment, they're not too dissimilar to us humans really. They're going to be attracted by food, shelter, safety, and I think perhaps warmth as well. Now obviously you are going to have a lot of people around, but that is exactly why urban wildlife can work so well, because the birds and animals are just so used to people. They're seeing people walk by every day, and they just become used to that, and they're not a threat. So it often means that the wildlife can be more approachable. Something a little bit different about shooting in towns and cities, and that is related to the buildings. So if you've got very tall buildings like we have here in Leeds, and that can really affect the light because it can block out the sun sometimes for a large part of the day, so you really want to bear that in mind. However, sometimes that can be to your advantage. I just had some black-headed gulls here flying, hovering over the water. The light was catching them, but the buildings were quite dark behind, and that just gave a lovely lighting effect. One of the reasons that birds sometimes congregate in the city is for roosting, particularly in the winter. So if you see any areas that really look more dense, bushes and trees, then always check them out. You never know, you might find a roost. And also bridges can sometimes be good as well. I've just seen a grey wagtail. I actually heard it because the wagtail call is quite distinctive to me, and I thought it was a grey wag, and it was. So what are these things? They're like buoys. Getting close towards the weir. Obviously I'm just under the bridge here. I think this might be a good area for grey wagtail. It was actually on top of one of those orange things, and then it went up onto the wall, like right on the edge of the path by the edge of the canal. So that's great to see. Here is a picture of a grey wagtail, so you know what to look out for. One of the things I love about this environment is the reflections that you can get. You can just get so many different colours. You might get this on a river, but it's going to be more common on a canal. Here we've got lots of different colours, the different brickwork, some metalwork in there as well, and all that reflects in the water just gives some beautiful colours and quite interesting shapes at times as well. Just had a couple of mallards that just swam by there, and as they were gliding by, the background reflections were just changing all the time. You want to always be ready for something to fly by on the canal, because it's just a natural flight path for a bird to fly along the water. I just had a cormorant did exactly that. It's the third cormorant I've had this morning that's done a flyby very close. And I think it's a great opportunity to show the relationship with wildlife and the urban environment in your pictures. So anything that just shows that surrounding is really going to tell the story. I've just seen a kingfisher on the other side of the canal. I don't believe it. It's just gone, oh my word, it's just gone in. It just dived in the water. I think it caught a fish. So I've just seen it dive, I think about 4 times. So it's like it's making multiple attempts and failing. It's just done it again. It keeps going. Absolutely amazing. Wow. Urban wildlife. Make sure you pay attention to safety of your gear. Obviously you should do this at all times, but it becomes more important when you're in a town or a city like I am today. So I've got my camera on a strap, so it's round me at all times, and I'm keeping my bag on my back, trying to keep it nice and tight. I'm very good at leaving my bag in random places and then picking it up, but not today. Keep that on me. If I'm putting anything down for a brief period, I'm putting it down right below me, maybe between my legs. Just try and keep everything on you or as close as possible. You could even put the bag on the front of your body if that made you feel a little more confident, you know, like you're carrying some baby around. Camera is my baby, kind of. And just a few quick tips. The first one of which is just try and make sure that you know where you are as much as you can at all times. You don't want to suddenly find you're in someone's garden or trespassing. Just try and be aware of your surroundings, and also be aware of where you're pointing the camera. If you're in a town or city, it's very easy to point towards someone's window with the camera, so you want to try and avoid that as much as you can. And also where there's children around, just be wary of that. You don't want to get any undue attention. Oh, I've just seen goosander. In fact, not one, two, three goosanders. Oh, and they're in the reflection as well. They come closer to the edge. There's a male and a female here. Two have broken away, but there's a male goosander. One of them took off, female. I just managed to get the camera up quick enough, locked on, tracked it. Absolutely beautiful. And that background again, that urban background, sort of orangey red from the reflecting building. I've come to Roundhay Park now, and this is a huge park. It's about 700 acres, I believe, and it's quite a mixture as well. We've got some woodland, parkland, a big lake, and I'd say there's quite a lot of mature trees. So it's a little bit further out from the centre, but it's still within my 5-mile radius. It's got really good paths, and there's a cafe at either end. I know there's lots of wildlife here, lots of birds. I think when you're shooting in an urban environment like this, having a smaller, lighter lens, something that you can carry around much easier, change position, I think is probably the best option. And maybe it doesn't attract quite as much attention as a really big lens. So I've got a 400 here today, which is nice and small, or possibly a 300mm might work quite well. And because the wildlife tends to be a little bit more approachable, then 300mm might be perfectly fine, or sometimes even less. There's quite a few crows around here and magpies in this little spot, and we've got a few wood pigeons as well. You're never far away from a grey squirrel. I've just heard quite a distinctive sound coming from this direction, which sounds like parakeets. Or it might seem a bit strange, but there are some parakeets around Leeds. I know a couple of locations. It seems like they're here as well. Let's head over here. It's like a little copse almost here. It's almost like a bit of a circle of trees, and the sound of the parakeet just got louder. Definitely in there. I don't know if it's one, if it's more than one, if a few. I just heard the parakeet again, but it sounded like it was from behind me. So behind me where I've just been, I actually saw a parakeet. It took flight and it landed in these trees, and I'm pretty close to where I think it landed. I can't see it. They're right above me. 2, maybe 3. They're so noisy. One's landed in the top of this tree. I think it's an oak tree. Now, I don't know where these parakeets originally came from. Obviously they're not wild, they're not native. I'm assuming that they escaped from somewhere and they've started to breed. There are a few areas in Leeds where I've seen them also. People are wondering what the hell I'm doing. But they are so noisy. I mean, oh my god, there's one flying right there. I just missed the flight shot. Oh. I decided that my best chance of getting a picture was to try for some flight shots. So I stayed in this general area, the edge of the trees, looking out into the open, the sun behind me, perfect blue sky. It was just a case of waiting. I feel like this is probably a good time to mention clothing. So if you're photographing in the town, city, parks and gardens, then I wouldn't try and wear camouflage. Just wear fairly ordinary clothes, because that's what everyone else is doing, and your birds and animals are used to that. You know, if you suddenly start putting on camouflage and creeping towards them, they're not as used to that behaviour, so it's probably more likely to make them suspicious. And if you decide to go full on Bigfoot mode, then it might not attract the wildlife, but it probably will attract the police. I definitely heard one. Sun's getting low as well now. See, the sun's getting low to the horizon. It's getting cold. No parakeets so far. And the problem now as well is it's really hard for me to judge the light because I'm completely in the shade. All the shadows are creeping across this field, but I don't know exactly how far the sun's reaching. So if anything flies here, I don't really know if it's lit or not. I can't tell. So I won't really know till it happens. If it happens, till it happens. And this is probably a good time to mention as well a difficulty with these kind of locations, which is toilets. And that's because if you're in the countryside, like middle of nowhere, it's much easier just to find some cover, to find some bushes behind a tree, whatever. But if you're in a town or you're in a big park like this, yeah, there might be some toilets somewhere, but you've got to kind of leave your post and go and then come back. You can't usually just kind of nip off into a corner, or again you'll probably attract the police. So it's just something to bear in mind, because I really need the toilet right now. Well, I did have a few more views of those parakeets, but they were just staying really high all the time, and any flight they took was just between the trees. Couldn't get a clear view. They never came back out into the open. Maybe on another day I'd be lucky. Do you have any really good locations close for you for urban wildlife photography? Obviously don't give away any sensitive locations. I'd love to know what kind of subjects are out there that people are able to photograph near the towns and cities. Morning everybody, this is day 2 and welcome to Junction 45 on the M1. This is Skelton Lake Motorway Service Station on the edge of Leeds, and I've come here today. You might think these places would never be any good for wildlife, but I have had some success with a few species at service stations in the UK. Now I know particularly here is pied wagtails. Anytime I've come down here, I've always seen the pied wagtails roaming around and flitting about over the cars, so that's going to be like my main target today, and then just whatever else we see. It is a relatively new service station. I think it opened in 2020, but it's very wildlife friendly. It's got kind of an eco roof, they call it a living roof. Lots of wildflowers planted up there. This is another example of the building blocking the light, and here where the pied wagtails are spending a lot of their time, it's pretty much remaining in shade for the entire day. That means the light doesn't always look that great, and also it means high ISOs almost all the time. So a camera that really performs well in low light at high ISO really helps. I'm using auto ISO as I often do, and I've got it on aperture priority. Now you can set a minimum shutter speed when you do this, and I went for a minimum shutter speed of 1/500th because I thought I'm just going to be doing more static shots, it's probably going to be fast enough. But in reality, the speed of those wagtails, the way they zip around, I just didn't think it was fast enough. So I very quickly made the decision to change that to put the minimum shutter speed to 1,000th of a second. Now usually photographing anything on the ground like this, I would get down to the same level. I'd do my very best to get down to the ground, or at least a little bit closer to it. But here it's just not quite that easy to do this. Number one, I don't really want to get run over. And number two, it just again draws so much attention to you. One thing I'm not sure is what they're actually feeding on, because they don't tend to come to food that we put in our gardens like birdseed and things like that, but they're obviously feeding on some kind of little scraps. So if you have any idea what they're feeding on, please do let me know, put it in the comments. So this is a little tip I think I've learned today, which is if you're waiting for something, there's some seats, just sit down. So I've just sit myself down here, because you just look less suspicious when you sat down with stuff in general, so yeah, you won't get stared at as much. Not surprisingly, this is a very difficult location to photograph birds, and it seems that the pied wagtails are mostly hanging around the busiest area close to the doors of the service station. So I decided to go a little further away from most of the cars towards the end of the car park. I did get just a couple of opportunities a little bit further up where it was quieter. There's less people around and there was a couple of pied wagtails, so I managed to get a couple of shots. But there's also a dunnock as well, and the dunnock was just really tame, got very close to that, and that's a bird I haven't seen here before. So it just goes to show there's other birds, and there's loads of robins. I've seen 3-4 robins, I'd say, probably different ones along the stretch of the front of these services, all singing. Something that I absolutely love in the urban environment is artificial lights. When you can use those in your pictures, you can get something really unusual, and sometimes you can combine that with a bit of ambient light as well. So like shooting at twilight, you can get some amazing results. So probably possible to do that here once it's dark enough and the lights come on, and also where I was earlier by the canal. Okay, well I think I'm going to head off before I get collared by a security guard and on to the next location. I decided to take a detour to the car park of a well-known supermarket chain. There's always been a lot of starlings here, and again it's a fantastic urban setting. As soon as I arrived I could hear the starlings. They do have some beautiful calls and a lovely song as well, very underrated, and generally a very underrated bird. I could see them on the structures under the roof, the main entrance to the supermarket. A few were flying around the car park, walking on the ground, and there was a few starlings that were finding higher ground from which to sing from. I didn't spend much time here, but the images I got I really liked. The mixture of colour, again just that wonderful urban connection. This picture I find really interesting, and it kind of looks like there's some artificial light in the background, but there isn't. What it is simply a mixture of light and shade, the starlings in the shade, and that background brightness is actually the light catching on the sign at the top of the supermarket. I would love to do some more like this, these kind of images explaining the thought processes of what I'm trying to do. If you'd like to see a video on that, just let me know in the comments. I've got just a few hours left now of this 2-day challenge, and I've come to a place called Gledhow Valley Woods, which is kind of like a bit of a green corridor really in Leeds. You've got Roundhay that way, Chapel Allerton in that direction, and it basically runs along Gledhow Beck. And this is a place I don't know at all. I think I've been here once in my entire life, but it looks absolutely gorgeous today, and it's such a nice mixture. I can already see we've got some really nice woodland up there, all the orange, which I think is maybe beech leaves, there's some chestnut in there as well. And along this beck there is like a mill pond, so we might get something on there, and possibly roe deer, because there's definitely roe deer around this region. Right next to the busy road, but it's all urban wildlife. We've got a couple of swans on here, 3 swans. The light here is really quite interesting. Get some of these swans. I very much like sort of light and shade in my pictures. It's actually one of my favourite things. And whilst these swans are in the shadows, there's some colour reflecting from the distant trees, catching that winter sun. Almost kind of yellowy orange. It's a really nice colour combination. This is one of those locations again that doesn't really get a lot of sun. But this time it's not anything artificial. It's just the really tall trees over to the west, and the sun's not even above them. and you can see in the shade here it's all completely frozen still. I was a little bit concerned when this mute swan decided to push its way through the ice, and I have seen birds like this, including swans, almost get stuck in this situation. But the bird powered through, breaking through the ice, managed to get back out into the clear water. I'm still working on auto ISO. Here I've underexposed a little bit by -2/3. That's to make sure I don't lose any detail in the white feathers, and also to keep that background nice and dark. Just heard kingfisher for sure behind me where the beck is. It does say on the sign that kingfishers are seen here in the winter. Something wrong with my head. I've got an oddly shaped head because whatever I do, the hat will never stay in one place, it always goes round that way. I don't know, blame my mother. I just missed some amazing shots, like absolutely, not this time, I'm not gonna. Swan's flying right at me, I'm not gonna mess this one up. Oh my goodness. If you could hear that, because they're so loud. Maybe a bit scared to check on the back of the camera. So what happened basically, I put the camera down and the swans were at the far end of the lake, and all of a sudden they just took off, 2 of them, a pair of them, and they flew right towards me, just like perfect, good distance. I froze for a second, just for some reason, and then I quickly grabbed the camera and I did everything right. I did a pretty good job. And afterwards looked, and I don't think any of the shots are sharp. I had it on a 1 focus point rather than my subject tracking, and I'd forgotten that. So that just goes to show you nothing's perfect, no one's perfect. The subject tracking really helps for the birds in flight, and I use it all the time, and it just wasn't on that, and I just messed it up. Second time around I didn't make any mistakes, but the background isn't as good because it wasn't at the same angle. So there you go. Actually, when I look through the shots, there's a couple that aren't too bad at all. They've got a fairly clear background. They're really sharp, and I've even got some water dropping from the swan as well. Thank God I got another go at that. Pretty much this entire video has been photographing birds because they are usually the more accessible subject. But other animals I would look out for in the urban environment include deer, roe deer, possibly red deer, and definitely foxes. Just check locally, you might find out, you know, there are some foxes quite nearby. And on bodies of water like your rivers and canals, you might even find there's otters, possibly mink, which we don't really want. If you're really lucky, you might even find there's water voles. On smaller bodies of water, your little ponds, definitely keep a lookout for amphibians, for your frogs and toads. Even a garden pond can harbour a good population of frogs. And don't forget your insects as well. It's all part of the biodiversity, all part of the ecosystem. If you felt inspired by this video to give urban wildlife photography a try yourself, then some of the places I would specifically look for include cemeteries. I'm going to be doing a video about cemeteries in Berlin soon, look out for that. Also churches, churchyards, bridges can be really good, and anywhere where there's water. Now, photographing in towns and cities is generally much easier to get close to your subject, but are there any other ways to help you get closer to wildlife? I've got a video here for you to watch all about different ways you can get close to wildlife in order to photograph it. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.